So since the majority of the market currently is kind of focusing on CBD or just cannabinoids in general, we kind of wanted to do a little bit of myth busting. So CBD is affected by almost everything. You look at CBD the wrong way and it disintegrates pretty much. So it's a very fickle molecule. With that being said, there's a lot of factors that affect CBD, specifically during harvest. So how you harvest, we're harvesting method. If you're using a whole plant harvest, or if you're going to combine or forage chop, both of those, you'll see slightly different effects on the CBD. Some pre-drying processes. So if you're shucking and bucking your plants, or if you're trying to wet separate before harvest, all of those are things that will definitely affect your CBD numbers. And then storage until drying. This one seems like a no-brainer. You're going to want climate-controlled storage as much as possible. We saw somebody who was harvesting their plants. They put their plants on a tarp for only about 2 hours and then sent their plants through the dryer. And in that 2-hour window, they actually saw a pretty considerable loss because it was just on a tarp, room temperature with the sun. So really putting it in climate-controlled storage will really protect those molecules. You'll be watching your humidity, you'll be watching your temperature, all of that it doesn't indefinitely pause degradation by any means, but it gives you a little bit of wiggle room to just breathe for a second and then figure out what your next step is.
Yeah, I mean, the plant itself, you're going to experience the least amount of loss when handling it wet. I get that question a lot from people, and I try to let them know, once you've dried it, especially say you've got it hung dried, once you've hung dried it successfully, then it actually is incredibly brittle. And when all that dust that's going in the air every time you touch it is the CBD loss that you're experiencing. So think about that too. When you're looking at these processes, I always try to get people to think you're going to do the least amount of damage at harvest when it's wet and still sticky. And, that loss is going to occur, but a lot less than if you let it get to a brittle state where it's really easy to experience it.
Absolutely, you're exactly right. I like to tell people that your plants can take the most beating when they're wet. So if you have to shred it or chop it or hammer mill it at any point in the process, you'll typically see the least amount of loss when it's wet, when your plants are still sticky. Like Matthew said, once your plants are dry, and I've seen this countless times with my hang drying experience, you look at a dry plant the wrong way and keef just pops off of it like spores. It's very, very brittle. And that's what you're looking for. That's your concentrated CBD. People like to call it dust, but it's more like gold dust. That's not something that you want to be losing during your process.
Yeah, and it's, that's part of it is, again, thinking about a process. You can do sorting on the back end that's dry and get, some of the bigger materials sorted out and ended up with the best stuff that's extractable, and do that really successfully with pneumatics and other things that are out there. So, you don't always have to think about doing everything on the front end or doing everything on the back end. It's probably some combination of both, where, you want to handle it this way on the front end to minimize your loss, but then sort it this way on the back end. So that's like we'll keep talking about this idea of this all being part of a big process that you want to think about.
Exactly. So there's a couple other factors that affect CBD during harvest, and that's the when. So the maturity of your plants. That one's kind of a no-brainer. Obviously, your plants will have the highest numbers as they're the most mature. However, we're definitely playing a numbers game here, especially with the lockdown on THC. So the higher your CBD numbers go, typically the higher your THC numbers go. It's always on a ratio. So just keep that in mind. There's never going to be a plant that's 100% CBD, 0% THC. So we're definitely kind of playing the numbers game. So that's a big one to watch, especially now that the USDA has come out with different harvesting procedures, and each state has a slightly different one, whether they have their own program or whether they adopted the USDA program. But either way, that's definitely something to be aware of during your harvest window. Another thing to be aware of. Oh, go for it, Matthew.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I also really encourage, this obviously, having hot hemp is a real problem. And a lot of what's going to happen with your CBD is linked to the genetics. And a lot of that is expressed fairly early in terms of sort of the ratios that exist in the plant. I'm really encouraging people to look at doing more predictive testing when they first start growing, because if a strain is 1 part THC and 5 parts CBD when it's little, it's still going to be 1 part THC and 5 parts CBD when it's big. It will just be expressed over a bigger number. So that's a way that you can look at getting smarter and think about ways to protect yourself in this process of not putting effort into that. It can also help you, you see a lot more of the portable equipment, to have the ability to do some of your own testing along the way, or work with a lab to do that testing, to dial in when you're going to get the best maturity. Typically we would spend a lot of times looking at the resin glands. That it gets a lot more difficult to do that when you're looking at hundreds of acres, and also understanding that if you are looking at hundreds of acres and one part of it is ripe, that means that part on the back is also ripe right now too. So how are you getting it all down before it over-ripens?
Absolutely. Because once you pop hot, that's kind of the end, unfortunately, at this point. Another factor that affects CBD during harvest is the time of the year. So ambient moisture plays a pretty big role in that, especially during harvest. And then temperatures and weather as well. So if it's been raining a lot, you'll have a lot more moisture in your fields. You'll have a lot wetter soil. Your plants will be higher moisture content. So all of those, you'll kind of see a slight effect. And then again, time of day. So in the morning, if you're harvesting in the morning, there's actually typically more moisture in the AM. When you think about, dew in your yard, you see a lot of water in the morning, and it just kind of evaporates over the day. So if you have that option, definitely try to avoid harvesting in the morning, because that will lead to more moisture, meaning more moisture that you need to get out of your plants. Another factor would be time until drying. So whether that's going directly from your field into the dryer, or whether that's going to go sit in climate controlled storage for a little bit, or if you're baling as well. All of those, you'll see slight differences. The baling topic is definitely an interesting one. Last year, it was kind of approached as a little bit of a get out of jail free card. We have seen that it is not, unfortunately. I typically only recommend baling for transportation or very short-term storage. It's not a get out of jail free card. You will not get exactly out of that bale what you put into it. So just some things to keep in mind. However, it's definitely an attractive option if you're looking at losing your entire field. It gives you just a little bit more wiggle room, but it's by no means a stopping point.
Yeah, unfortunately, they've kind of experienced a lot of degradation, and I think now even the industry seems to be telling you that you needed to get it down to 50% moisture for it to bale, right? So, the problem is that most hemp coming out of the field is 75 to 80, and if you go through a process to get it down to 50, then I don't know how you can't do that in the field unless you're in a very few number of states. So that's why I think it's not quite the, like Shauna said, get out of jail free card that it kind of looked like last year. Because the storage, it degrades pretty fast enough in the bales that it's not as good of a long-term solution as we used to think.